Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I began to wonder for a minute if you were going to read the obituary. And I do appreciate the recall of the meeting in Colorado, and so I will say to you that I plan to talk for a few minutes and then you could have at me. But by the way, that's a two-way street. If you're dealing, you better be able to catch. So, Tom, well, it's good to see you again. We appreciate the working relationship we have with your company. And I've seen a lot of friends that we've known through the Chamber and other activities, and I appreciate you all coming out on Friday. I'm particularly pleased to see John Bachman, who served as our chairman in 2005, 4 and 5, and we had a little private meeting before with others, and when we write the history of how the hell we ever got this done, John Bachman's name is going to be right near the top of what happened. I would be remiss if I didn't say a word about Dick. 17 years in this job, and now off to whatever the next adventure is, and everybody, wherever you have been, and particularly here, I'm very appreciative of your contributions and of your very gracious way of getting people to come and do with maybe what they didn't want to do in the first place, but you get them to do it. He's out, without a question, one of the top folks we have in the chamber world, and we call on him regularly, and I don't think he'll go very far away. His real legacy goes beyond the facts and figures of all the things you can say about his career. It's a dignity, I think, that he's brought to the people who fill these jobs and to who they serve. Great enthusiasm, but a very calm way of making everybody feel like they're the important ones, and he doesn't care as much as many others do about who gets the credit. So congratulations, good fortune, and come see me as we discussed. You know, a lot of Americans today would argue that the country has lost the qualities that Dick and others exemplify, and that it made us a great nation over a long time, and with extraordinary expansion and accomplishment following World War I and II. Some Americans look to rapidly rising countries like China, India, Brazil, and wonder whose century is it going to be? Is it going to be theirs, or is it going to be ours? They see, for example, the Chinese system that stresses long-term planning, that executes quickly, and that is focused on the future. They lose sight of the fact that China is a dictatorship, and that you can do things there that may not go on for as long. For example, we all see massive economic growth, and if you go out and talk to people in the street, talk to people in your family, and they say, what's the biggest economy in the world? Oh, it's China. Oh, really? How big is it? Oh, it's big. Well, how big is the United States? Well, the United States, 14, 15 trillion. China maybe will just breaking 4 or 5 trillion, and they're growing at 5, 10% a year, depending on how you count the deal. And of course, if you take 15 trillion, and if you grow at 3 or 4% a year, you get a pretty big multiple. And, you know, but this is in fact happening in Brazil and India and places all around the world, because folks are hungry, they have a lot of natural resources, they're out, they've watched what we've done, and they're trying to do it. Meanwhile, we've watched what the Europeans have done, and we're trying to do that. Doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. Big question, by the way, with China. If you think about a triangle, this side of the triangle is all the economic growth and all that. Can that form of government continue to sustain that form of economy? We shall see. A lot of what we hear about at home, we hear a lot about people hollering about our middle class, jobs moving overseas, a growing mountain of government regulations, mandates and rules. Maybe we're not doing as well as we should. They're keenly aware that many of our major competitors are providing their children some of their children, a better education than we are now. And that's why people see And that's how they see these things, and they feel badly. I see something totally different. By the way, I don't argue with a single one of those facts, but I see something different. I understand that America has a lot of big challenges in front of her. Yes, our competitors are closing in on us from many sides. And yes, we are still shaken by the worst recession since the Great Depression. But I don't see a nation destined to gradually slide into mediocrity. I see a nation that remains resilient, and adaptability is very strong in our country, and a fierce desire to win by some portion of our society. I see a country whose best days are yet to come, and a country whose demographics supports them in going forward. One of the things you ought to look at all the countries across the world that we compete with, and ask yourself a fundamental question. What's their demographic reality? And if you look at a lot of the European, and you take Italy, for example, in 70 years there won't be any more Italians, you know, because of their growth rate. You look at Japan, that had that total tragic tsunami this morning. And by the way, there was a second earthquake behind it, and I haven't heard what happened as a result of that. But they have an economic challenge that's fundamental, and it is a challenge that doesn't allow immigrants and that has a growing, shrinking population. And in many of the countries that have a demographic challenge, they also have a challenge amongst the newest generation of whether they want to work as hard as their parents and others have done. So I don't see us in a real serious problem. I see us as a great nation with problems that need to be dealt with. And we have, in fact, wandered away from some of the principles of our founding fathers. And in fact, we had to change some things. You know, our founding fathers didn't have BlackBerries, didn't have the internet. How did they get by? Didn't have any of that stuff. And I don't know how they got there. But they did lay out some fundamental rules of the road, which we have for a long time valued, and that is the rule of our independent liberty, the rule of a law that protects us most of the time, the ethic of hard work, the right to get up and succeed further and better than the guy next door because you outworked him, you outthought him, you out-hustled him, you stayed up later. And at the same time, we're all realistic. Our federal government has grown too large, too expensive, too intrusive, and instead of trying to do a few things very well, they're trying to do too many things. And by that, why? It's not all the government's fault. It's because we, the people, are looking for the government to fix so many of our problems. Oh, something bad happened. Well, we should have a regulation. That'll help. And something really bad happened. Well, then you should subsidize me on that, you know. And some of those issues are very easy to understand. Going back to demographics, when you look at the healthcare challenges in this country, they are demographic challenges. When you look at the retirement challenges in this country, they are demographic challenges. You know, when we put Medicare in this country, the average death age was 62. It's now 79. Who's paying for all those people in between? And these are real, serious issues for all of us. And if you look at the families in this country, there's a great angst. You know, somebody told me the other night that any TV show after 10 o'clock at night now, the ratings are going in the can. Why would you be surprised when you have these families that are raising children, and many of them grandchildren, and still caring for their parents, and maybe their grandparents, and 2 workers at least in the family, not too much time for 10 o'clock news. And it is in that environment that we've got to deal with the challenges of this country, and we need to deal with it with the entrepreneurial spirit that for a long period of time made us the envy of the world. And people are still copying what we did, why we've got to go back and find some of it. An unshakable commitment this country has always had to innovate, to improve, and to reshape, and that's what we have to do again. We have to have a confident openness. This argument that says, let's lock up the door and don't trade and don't let people in our country and don't let immigrants in. I mean, get a life. 95% of the people we want to sell something to live somewhere else in the world, and as all these guys get bigger and better and stronger, if we want to lock the door, they're just going to go on without us. And by the way, they got some things we need, like energy and people and other issues and markets. So we have to also take a look at our education system. Is anybody in this room proud of the fact that 30% of the kids in this country don't graduate from high school? Now look, today, if you're a high school graduate, we have 8.5%, 9% unemployment, and maybe another 3 or 4 or 5% that aren't looking for jobs right now, and so it's really a higher unemployment. But if you are a high school graduate today, on the unemployment situation, the unemployment for high school graduates is about equal to the number. The official number, what's it, 8.5? If you are a college graduate, it's more like 4.5 or 5. And if you have a graduate or a scientific degree, you're getting down in the 1s and 2s and 3s. On the other hand, if you don't have a high school diploma, in many places in this country, it's 30% unemployment. How can we sit around and let that happen and think that this nation has a future? And a world-class infrastructure, which we, since Eisenhower built the highway system, and then we built, who had the best airports? Who had the best ports? Now, some of that, by the way, was driven by global conflicts, where we were forced to do this. Who had the best electrical power generation system in the world? Who had the best broadband? But we're not keeping up with lots of people around the world, and that, see that table? That is the infrastructure on which you play the game of community and business and society. And if you don't have a strong infrastructure, you're going to find out that playing that game is not competitive. It's hard to think of a region in this country that has thought longer or harder than the people around here to get a strategy to drive their economy, to fix their infrastructure, to deal realistically with their demographics. Your core strategies and the fix the six deal that's going on around here, you know, I'm going to mail that. I got a hold of it when I'm going to mail that to a whole lot of chambers. They shouldn't all be the same. They shouldn't all have the same core strategy or the same 6 things to fix, because everybody's got different 6 things. But they are fundamental, and that is the rules of employment, the rules of retirement, the rules under which government should behave and society should behave, so that we don't make it impossible for companies to do what they do best. Create wealth, hire people, you know, build communities, put $60, $70 billion a year into philanthropy. And we're making it more difficult to do that. And I really think we could take a bit of an example from this part of the country and learn something. We got to get back to some basics. So in the next few minutes, I run an organization that follows 300 and some issues. You're not going to hear about that from me. I run an organization that's got its own plan of 8 things we're trying to drive. I'll give you some of that. But most of all, I just want to pick out a few things that if we put some time and energy into, and we thought about it, we might make things a little better in this country. So first, let me talk about the fundamental realities of regulation. If you have a government, if you have an orderly society, you have to have regulation. I have never had any authority to make regulations in my house. My wife made all those regulations. And you damn better live by them, you know, or the same thing in your house. And our sons and I had to, actually our sons and I are all in business, and we always were doing a lot of things when they were young. And my wife, who's got a lot of education, went back and got an accounting degree. And I said, why are you doing that? And she said, I don't trust you guys. We're going to spend our money. I'm going to know what the hell we're doing. And that's a great attitude. But over-regulation is a real problem. So we spend $1.75 trillion a year on regulation in this country. And by the way, we need most of it. We need a huge amount of it. We need air traffic control regulations, but we should get busy and do the high technology, which is very cheap, and get around all those arguments and do that. We need regulation on the road. We need regulation in healthcare. We need regulation in food. We need, we need regulation. It's an orderly society. And for a long, long time, we bitched and moaned about the regulation, but it was pretty, you know, you could deal with it and you could go fight with it. And then we had a big bleep up when George Bush was in office because of Homeland Security. You know, we had a reaction to 9/11 that was somewhat like what happened after Pearl Harbor. And we put in more rules and regulations and protections, and who would stand up and say no? Well, we're looking now how to put them together more effectively and do that sort of thing. But, okay, we had the bleep. The society said, great, we're going to pay for it, we're going to do that. And I can tell you, I can't tell you specifically because then I'd have to kill you all, and I can't do that. But a lot of the things that they put in place made it possible not to have some other very, very ugly happening. And only in America could you have stopped that. So now then, where are we? We are building a regulatory, and what we call it, and one of my staff said to me this morning, don't say this because of what happened in Japan. Because we call it a regulatory tsunami. And what the tsunami did this morning in Japan was huge waves going over, you know, highways and homes and communities. But you can vision that in what I'm talking about regulation. Let me give you just 3 examples. And it doesn't matter whether you like the health care bill or not. We wanted a health care bill. We think we have gotten something that fundamentally is going to cost a lot more than we thought, or that was alleged. We can prove that. It's going to restrict health care the way we don't want it to happen. But it's got some good things in it. But, let's see, how many people we got here? 100? Well, let's say, just for argument's sake, let's say there's 140 or 50. That's how many new agencies, committees, commissions, bureaucratic offices that are going to regulate the healthcare system eventually under this new bill. That's worse than having the Motor Vehicle Administration control the healthcare people. So I'm not arguing, some of those things are worthwhile, but any rational person would say, I don't think we're going to get to where we want to go with that kind of regulation. And every one of those has multiples of regulation. So you wouldn't be surprised that already that the Department of Health and Human Services has given more than 1,000 exemptions to the healthcare bill that hadn't been in place for over a year. And that's because they're finding out that this thing that was done in a great frenzy is not exactly what we thought, and we have to go back and do something about it. So a lot of regulation. Then there is the issue of the regulation of the capital markets. Some would argue, and I would too, that there was some regulation that we needed. Only problem with this massive regulation of the capital markets, it never regulated or dealt with what caused the problem. I mean, what caused the first part of the problem was a very legitimate, caring concern by people that folks should be able to own a house, whether you could afford it or not. And so we put a thing in place that really, and it was the Congress, they were pushing the organizations of government, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and the banks and everybody to make these loans available. And after the savings and loan crisis of many years ago, we told all those institutions, now you securitize all those loans. Securitize meaning you sell them to somebody else right away. Well, that was before we started selling things all over the world. And the securitization of those loans look like spaghetti now. So we didn't fix that. And by the way, they're still at it on the foreclosure parts of this stuff. But we did fix a whole lot of things. But think about this mathematically. Do you remember Sarbanes-Oxley? And Sarbanes-Oxley, I think I'm talking too long, I'll get this done quick. Sarbanes-Oxley was a deal that was well-intended. And so they passed the law, and then they had to pass 16 regulations to make it work, and it took 2.5 years. And we got through it, and we're working on it, and we're fixing some of the stuff that didn't work. But most of all, I thought it did some good stuff. So now, what was the financial regulatory bill? There were, everybody's arguing what the number was, but let's just say 250 to 275 mandated regulations, depending whether you take them apart or put them together. and another 200 recommended regulations. Now, whatever you're talking about 400 or 500 regulations. So I figure this granddaughter I'm going to see later today, 5 years old, is going to be retired from federal service before we ever get all that stuff implemented. So everybody knows you can't make that work. And I did a press interview before, and the questions that were asked, pretty smart guy, I said, look, the point is, what do we do to make sure the system works, and what do we do to make sure there's capital for people that want to start a business, run a business, continue a business, or employ somebody? So what we're doing is very simple. We're going into the Congress, and we're saying, look, I've got to do two things. We want the Congress and the Senate to take an up and down vote on any regulation that costs more than $100 billion. Pretty fair, good deal? And we want to change the rules, now it might get some people upset here, on how we could file a suit against the regulation. And with all the independent agencies and everybody got one set of rules. And that is it economically sound? Does it do its deal? But with the EPA, who, by the way, couldn't, the administration couldn't get anything out of the Congress on some of the things they're going to do, so they told the EPA to do it. But they have a set of rules under which they can be sued that is equivalent to saying if they're not a terrorist, you can't sue them. And so what we're saying, two things. Let's put the bill in so the guys we sent to Congress and the Senate can vote it up or down. Because then we're not going to get with 500. We'll come back with 50. And let's get a deal so we have a clear understanding what it takes to raise the issue in court. And I think if we can get that done, we're going to be doing well. And then we're going to do one other thing, and this is not fair really, but we're going to do it. And that is we want to get some focus on these regulatory excesses. So we've gotten some real smart people who really understand these issues, and some people that run small companies, and we're going to have them all over the country this day, that week, next week, talking about these issues, talking about independent regulations that don't make sense to their business or to their community. Why we want the Congress to focus on this. When the government was set up in this country, it was a three-part government: the elective, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Who the hell ever heard of the regulatory branch that's 500 times the rest of them? So maybe we ought to have a little oversight. Okay, let me go to the second thing. I'm almost going to get there, Tom. I want to talk for just for a minute, I'm going to make two other comments about the environmental stuff. We need every kind of energy we can get in this country, and we need it for a long period of time. And I listen to a lot of young people, and even some supposedly rational people that think we can do this all tomorrow. We can do this all tomorrow with green energy. Right now, today, if you had to do it and you totally subsidize the green energy we have, we could maybe handle 1 3/4 to 2% of our energy needs. Period. You need 20 million barrels of oil every day in this country. We like the lights, we like the hospitals running, we like our cars to go. We have made, in this country, extraordinary progress in environmental things, so most people wouldn't say that. We didn't do the Kyoto Accords, others did. They didn't meet their responsibilities. We spent almost $2 trillion. We cut in half the number of BTUs it takes to do anything in this country. We've done extraordinary things in the energy area. And by the way, somebody told me there's some protesters outside, and they say I am against fixing the global warming issue. I would tell you that the Chamber of Commerce of the United States, we did a little program on this yesterday. We have identified 151 energy projects nationwide that have been stalled, and we have already supported them, that would create 1.1 trillion boost to the economy and millions of new jobs. You know why these are not in place? Not on my street, not in my town, not in my state, not on my planet. Or not if my union can't have the project, or not if my political grouping can't get the credit, or whatever the heck it is just a mistake. Americans know how to do things. And on the other hand, we're so comfortable that, that we find reasons not to do them. So let me go then to the second issue that I just want to make a point about, and I said something about it, so I'll be very brief, and that's infrastructure. I would simply say that we have come to a time, had we not hit this recession, we would have run into the wall on the infrastructure deal. I'm on the board of Union Pacific Railroad, 35,000 miles of track, cover half of the United States, more, much more, in terms of space. We had just come to the point where we were giving business to truckers, which is like for railroaders not believing in Santa Claus, and same thing in the ports, same thing in the aviation business, same thing in the roads and bridges. And so we need to have a rededication to building our infrastructure. I want to give you one overriding reason beyond all of that to do it. We're not going back in the housing business in a significant way for those people on the side where I said could be as many as 30% unemployed, contractors. We're not going back there for a while. We got to eat up that capacity. But we can get tomorrow to building infrastructure in this country and putting those people to work. And we can get 180 to 200 billion dollars of private money that's in this country, and not to mention what's around the world, to invest in it if the federal government will prime the pump. We have a highway bill in this country that does roads, bridges, and transit. And we haven't had an increase in the federal fuel tax for 17 years. I used to run the Trucking Association, and 17 years ago, those guys had twice the miles per gallon that they have today. In other words, they were getting, 3.5, 4 miles a gallon. Now you're getting 7 to 8 miles a gallon in a big truck. And you know what's happened to the cars, and there's far more of them on the road. And so guess what? We're running much more wear and tear on the roads, and we're paying half the amount of money for it. Now that doesn't make any sense. And people say, you can't do that, Tom. My own staff says, don't even talk about it. You can't do it. The price of fuel's up. I said, look, you do 15, 20 cents over 3 years, and nobody's going to notice it, except we're going to have the money to prime the pump. The federal government does 50%, the state government does 25%, the local government does 25%, but the state and local government can't do their deal until they get the federal to step up and do it, and we better do it, or we don't get those jobs, we don't get that infrastructure, and it gets much, much harder to be competitive. Let me sort of end with two thoughts. First of all, and I mentioned this education thing, we need human talent to succeed. What makes us great? It's not our buildings. Sure, we got great natural resources, we have wonderful land, we have a wonderful system of government, but the bottom line is, if you ain't got the people, you ain't got anything going on. And it is a crime what we're doing in our schools, not all our schools. Look, we're doing all these, charter schools where you got some school districts that are great. We have private schools, we send our kids. I didn't, I sent my kids to public school, but I live in the right place to do that. And I'm just telling you, we have got to do that. The second thing we have got to do, we have got to recognize who we are. You look around this room and I'll tell you who you are. Unless there's an American Indian here, we're all immigrants, and we're descendants of immigrants. And this nation is an aging nation. Not as bad as Japan, not as bad as a lot of other countries, but we're an aging nation. And we're a nation that needs certain kinds of skills. And we're a nation that needs people to do things that a lot of us don't want to do. So we used to have people sort of, we got about 12 million undocumented workers in this country. We don't have to make them citizens. We have to make them legal. And, so we locked down the borders a little bit. So you know what the farmers did in California? They moved to Mexico to grow their products and then sent them back to the United States. Why? Because they couldn't get the workers. So what we need is a way that farm workers can come in on a seasonal basis. They don't have to sneak over and pay to get here. They can drive in with official papers, and we need a legitimate immigration program, and Democrats and Republicans alike are demagoguing this thing beyond any common sense. And by the way, if we don't have it, we don't go there. And from an H-1B visas place, that's scientists and medical people and technical gurus and all that. We educate them. We get the best universities. Then we used to say, stay. Now we got two problems. We can't say stay, and they don't want to stay anyway because, you know, they're going to go back to India and work for GE in Bangalore for 2 years, and then they're going to go start their own company. And we have got to keep those people. So simply saying, if we cut down the regulation a little bit, if we build up our infrastructure, and we do something about our education system and the reality, the fundamental reality that we need human talent to succeed, we're going to be better off. Finally, what's most needed in this country, and everybody talks about bipartisanship, and people are angry in the legislature here, are angry in Washington. Oh, God, it used to be much worse. You know, years ago, you used to have fist fights on the floor of the House and beat each other over the head with canes and all. We're not doing anything. We're doing much worse. You know, what we say in the 24-hour media is much more violent. But the bottom line is, that's not our problem. Our problem is the Congress responds to what the citizens of this country appear to want. And so our fundamental future is about our willingness to face up to our own circumstances. We've got to fix the education thing, and you can't buy that. You got to fix it. We've got to come to some reasonable conclusions about our deficits, and that means we all have to play in that game. We've got to keep strong regulation to protect our society, but if we overprotect it, we will make it non-competitive. We will strangle it. And the fundamental thing we have learned of late, if you can't do it here, if you can't get the people here, if you can't function here because of the rules and the taxes, you can do it somewhere else. If you can't do the work here, you send the work somewhere else. And we can't do that. We want a free trade system that creates jobs in the United States. We want a regulatory system that protects us and doesn't smother us. We want an education system that gives the children of this country the same opportunities that we have. And we want to stop kidding ourselves and recognize that we can do whatever we're willing to do. It's a very tough time for those families I described. It's a very easy trip from there to this is what I've got to do. But the real question is, thinking about our children and grandchildren, is what do we have to do to get where everybody would see us at the right place. And I think the things that I see here, the things in this city and in this organization, and the things that I see all around this country, young people and citizens that are sort of standing up and saying, hey, time to make a change. Not throw everybody out. Time to make a change in attitude. I think it's very encouraging, and I feel pretty good about this country, and I appreciate you listening to me. And now I'll take any questions you have, and I know I used too much time. Yep.
Tom, a couple of years ago after the Madoff scandal, I attended a roundtable at the chamber regarding the things that the SEC was doing right. They were under a lot of press scrutiny at the time. Now, after Dodd-Frank, the SEC has hundreds of rules and hundreds of studies to do. How do you think they're going to fare in the upcoming year or two?
First of all, the chairman of the SEC is a good and smart woman. So they're under tremendous pressure from the Congress to find bad people. I mean, talk about the Madoff thing, all right? You know, it's not the SEC's job, it's not the IRS's job to go out and look around in people's underwear drawer and find fraud. It is their job to set up circumstances that set the rules, that give people good guidance on how not to do that, and to prosecute them if they break that law. And then we have all the things we're trying to push onto the SEC in terms of corporate governance. And who's pushing it? People that have nothing to do, for the most part, in the actual value of what the company is doing. They may be shareholders, small shareholders, but what they're looking is to use these corporate governance guidelines as a leverage to force companies to do other things, dealing with unions and dealing with environmental issues, that is not the business of boards of directors and not the business of petitions from shareholders, and we're going to have to work this all out. You did notice we sued him on proxy access, and that thing's sort of on the side. So I think, look, based on the rules they've given her, based on the challenges they have in front of them, based on the societal belief of some of the people that work there, I think she's doing a pretty good job. But they're now talking about cutting her resources. They got a lot of resources. Talking about cutting their resources while they're expanding their work. We're trying to help her. Sometimes the communication thing is a little, I mean, we always talk to them. So we might have to sue them a few more times. But I think well of her. Yes?
Tom, just to extend on your infrastructure comments, you made some interesting headlines recently before the Congress by joining the head of the AFL-CIO. I was wondering if you could talk about how that new constituency might help get the job done.
Well, it was fun. First of all, Trumker and I, good guy, former coal miner. Trumker and I put out an op-ed on the infrastructure thing. And then Barbara Boxer, who Trumka supported and I was trying to get her unelected out in California, invited us to come testify on those subjects before her committee in the Senate. And we did. And we were very well received, and we raised some of these very same issues, and including the gas tax, and we were arm in arm in this deal until we got to the last page of his testimony. You'll get a kick out of this. And then he says, yeah, on the way to finance this, in addition, we need a transaction tax on every bank. I said, Rich, you're out of your league, stop. And but the point is, he really believes in this whole question of our national infrastructure. He really believes it put a lot of people to work, and he cares about his people. He really believes, I think, that it'll get him more union members, too. It's okay with me. Let's get people to work. And I think you'll see us work out a deal on immigration. Look, you know, there's no... If you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog. I mean, the deal is you have people you can work with on one issue and you don't work with them on the other, but it doesn't have to be personal. And he and I have worked together for a long time. We're going to do some things on employing military. We're doing a big project on trying to find jobs for wounded veterans. I told him that. He said, we're in. What can I do? You know, so these are the kinds of things we can all get behind and do them together. And tomorrow we're going to go have a big, you know, fight about something else. So what? We're going to win. And sometimes. No, he's a good guy. And by the way, we have a big coalition with all the construction and the unions that deal in roads and bridges and the carpenters and these are great guys. We get together, we go have a fight on Thursday night, and Friday morning we got a meeting, say, okay, how are we going to get a highway bill done? How are we going to do this? And when I first came back to the chamber, that was really tough for some. Well, we don't deal with those people. I said, well, maybe you don't. I do. Because the only way to get anything done anywhere is to find the people that have an interest and build a coalition of interest to get it done. That's how you did it here. Yep.
I really appreciate what you're saying. We're all in this together, and we bring that kind of leadership. That's the kind of leadership we need. We are all in this together. We passed PACE in Missouri, Property Access Clean Energy. I'm wondering what the 4 or 5 top things of the chamber are, and if you are supporting the PACE program nationally, which needs a lot of help getting over some problems with being ready, that will really help our country be more sustainable and support energy efficiency and renewable energy.
Our 4 or 5 Thank you. Our 4 or 5 top things, and by the way, we follow 300 issues that I told you, and usually it's about 12 top issues, and we're trying to define what are the top issues. I mean, first of all is the regulatory explosion, and how do we put that down? Second is a set of free trade agreements that have already been done. They're all deal. If we don't do them, for example, the Korean Free Trade Agreement, if we do it, we'll get 70,000 jobs. If we don't do it by the middle of the year, we'll lose 350,000 jobs in this country because the EU and Canada and the Australians, they're all doing these deals. So bottom line, you have to do the trade deals. There are 3 of them been sitting around for 3 years, and I'd like to get a global trade agreement because I really think it would create billions and billions and billions of dollars for the United States. I'm very into this infrastructure thing we talked about. We're very aggressive on the human factor things, particularly education. We are committed, as I told you, we've supported a lot of energy, clean energy issues. Our only deal is we want to deal with the facts. We want a program that improves the environment and creates jobs at the same time, that keeps people working and deals with the fundamental reality of what kind of energy are you going to need for the foreseeable future, and you better get it before somebody else has it. I guess our whole issue would be very simple. I have a challenging job, as I have to represent the broadest scope of business all across this country. Little ones, huge ones, medium-sized ones. And remember why they come together. They come together for their fundamental protection and interest on the issues that I'm talking about. Same reason they join the Bankers Association, they join the Trucking Association. They come together for their common interests, while at the same time they're vigorously competing with one another. It's a very interesting thing to watch. You know, they come in and they all sit down, they're very polite, they went to nice schools, they say nice things, whether they're large companies and small, and they walk out the door and they begin beating the hell out of each other because they want to get the... It's a great system. And, you know, our deal is we really think it was a mistake when we were talking about climate without talking about climate and energy. Because energy is the fundamental thing that drives this economy. You know, honest to God, you're not going to believe this. We do a lot of surveys. There are a huge number of people that believe when you ask them where electricity comes from, it's when you turn on the switch. No, I'm not kidding. I'm not being funny. The surveys you put out to people, you know, so many people are engaged with just trying to survive and make their life work and everything. They don't think about some of that stuff, but it ain't just putting on the switch. And the big problem is a lot of what we're doing now is not going to survive forever. One other thing I'll tell you, and this is the last thing, that I really have at the top of my personal agenda, that I'm working on with our government and with companies, is the whole issue of cybersecurity. There are no secrets, none. I was in China. I do a lot of work in China. And I came back and I learned that while we were there, because of some things we were saying, that our computers had been broken into. By the way, the Chinese aren't the best. There are others much better than they. But the piece to resist once, we had them all shut down, out of there, and then we have a little building up on Capitol Hill, and it has a thermometer, like a thermometer over there. And you can call it from our main building to put the heat up or down and check the temperature. Well, they did from China. They had to call them back, and they went through the thermostat and got back into our servers. That's not the real problem. We know how to deal with that. It's the whole question of what's happening in business. You don't want to be in the music business or the movie business. And it's not just in the United States. The Indians who are big in the movie business, they tell me if they do a new movie in Delhi, before it's released, it's being sold under the counter in New York and Washington in the movie stores. So that we can deal with. But the cybersecurity now, where you can break into anybody's company, to anybody's bank, to anybody's information system, and do what you want with it without any accountability. is something that, and it's not, we're not talking about national security alone, we're talking about economic security. We're talking about personal security. And a lot of people want to blame the company, want to blame the banks that got broken into. You know, that's like blaming the guy that got robbed for getting robbed. And I want to tell you, if you want to know something, we're putting a lot of energy in. You want to think about it, and I will tell you. So I look around this room, people are in your systems, I guarantee it. You ought to think about it. Got time for two more, or one more?
One or two more questions.
Going once? Yes, sir.
One of the local major universities reports that 50% of this year's freshman class are in remedial reading just to handle collegiate work. How widespread do you find that illiteracy, and what advice do you have for us that we can do something about it?
First of all, that's probably true. There are a lot of very smart young people that can't read effectively. So it's probably true. It is also true that many, many companies have a simple approach to this. When they're looking for people, if they can prove to themselves they are really smart and they have a tough work ethic, they're spending billions and billions of dollars in teaching rudimentary, fundamental mathematical and communication skills to the people they hire. Now, you're lucky if you're in that circumstance and you get into that kind of a company that knows what they need and figure they're going to make something out of you. You makes my point. If 30% of the kids don't graduate from high school, I guarantee you there's at least another 12% that aren't very literate. This the most sophisticated country in the world? I don't think so. I think we need a revolution on that. There's a movie we're supporting and we help fund and we're pushing it all over the country. And I ask you as a personal favor to go see the movie. If you take your wife, she'll cry through the last part of it. It's called Waiting for Superman. It's the story of what's happening to kids in our public schools. Kids that want to learn. Kids and families. And you know, you go in the inner city, black families are desperate to get their kids an education. Very, very complicated. One more and I'm going. Going once, going twice, goodbye. Thank you very much.